lies. Now, I'll just rapidly complete the discussion. In Syria, what is happening is the incursion of death squads, which the Salafist death squads, the Muslim Brotherhood, and they they mingle in the protest movement, but in fact at the outset there was virtually no protest movement. There was an armed insurrection when it started up in Dara in mid-March. I left Syria in early March, these incursions of terrorists, armed terrorists, and all the reports confirm them. They've got weapons. Okay. They're involved in acts of arson against government buildings, the courthouse, the Ba'ath Party, or the agricultural bank. I mean, numerous public buildings. They are involved in attacks on police and armed forces. And there you see from the earlier reports casualties of police and civilian casualties, or casualties of protesters. What is happening is an exchange of gunfire between armed gunmen on the one hand and police and armed forces on the other. Bashar al-Assad bears a heavy burden of responsibility, but they did not trigger this crisis. It was triggered through the incursion of armed death squads who started shooting on civilians and on police. And the reports from the Lebanese and Israeli press are revealing in that regard and demonstrate the nature of this insurrection. The last report that I read from the Debka file, which is Israeli intelligence, states that first of all states that the insurgents have heavy machine guns. The demonstrators have heavy machine guns. Now, none of our media have told us, okay, that the protesters have heavy machine guns. I have to go and read it in the Israeli media, okay, which are not particularly pro-Syrian, but they're telling they contradict their statement. They say this is this is against the government, etc., and they're demonstrators, but they have heavy machine guns, and then they say Turkey is providing them with weapons, okay? So what you read in the newspapers is totally false. The government is fighting an insurrection of armed gunmen and with sophisticated weapons, people who have military training, because you don't go with an anti-tank device. They said anti-tank devices and machine guns if you don't have military training, okay? You might be able to handle Kalashnikov. But so whatever one's views on the government in Syria, this is not a peaceful protest as conveyed in the media. And it is not indiscriminate killing of civilians by government forces. Okay? Now the other aspect, I'll terminate on this because it's very important. Syria is at the crossroads of many important countries in the Middle East and several ongoing war theaters. Okay? Palestine, Iraq, and then you've got Lebanon, and you've Turkey, and further on, no borders with Syria, but further on, Iran, which is an ally of Syria. And it's very well understood in US military doctrine that the road to Tehran goes through Damascus. And what I'm saying, that if a military operation is launched on humanitarian grounds against Syria by NATO, and it's already on the drawing board, they're already discussing it and they're planning it, and it's in an advanced stage of readiness, with Turkey playing a very important role. That whole area, extending from the eastern Mediterranean, from North Africa, right through to the Chinese border with Afghanistan and the former Soviet republics, all that whole region flares up. Okay? And we're in the context of a much larger conflict. And I should also mention that on the drawing board of the Pentagon, the scenario of military escalation is there. It's embedded. It's not something which results, which are unknown. They know it and they want it. Okay? If they're going to attack Syria, Syria's not the ultimate objective. It's Iran and it's the broader region, and it's the conquest of an entire corridor. And ultimately, it is also targeting China and Russia. Okay? So we are potentially in a World War III scenario. If Syria is attacked, it's a country of over 20 million people. It's not like Libya. It has much greater military capabilities. It has allies, and that all hell breaks loose in that region. I should, to conclude, is that Syria is a country, it's a country of tremendous tolerance.
Tremendous what?
Religious tolerance of common values between Islam and Christianity. In fact, a sort of merging of values from the very early Christian period. And I mean, that's the feeling you get. It's an ancient civilization. It has 4,000 years of history. And that region is the cradle of civilization. If this war occurs, it's going to destroy our common heritage and history. And it's absolutely essential. I mean, Libya is part of this process, is part of this roadmap, but Syria, for me, Syria would be a much more deadly process. Well, I don't like to compare, because Libya is the gateway to the conquest of the entire African continent. And Syria is the gateway to the conquest of the entire Middle East, Central Asian region, extending right to the Chinese border. And that puts us in a very dangerous crossroads. Thank you very much.
For those who are familiar, particularly with the Global Research website, you will have been really inspired to have been reading, among the many other wonderful things, the articles that have been ongoing by Mahdi Darya Nazemroaya. His articles have been prolific, and he has been a real example of courage, staying through the most terrifying experiences. Not only threatened as all citizens of Libya were, but particularly because of his outspokenness and his courageous witness. So I'd like to introduce Mahdi Nazemroaya.
Thank you for having me. Everybody can hear, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so please forgive me if I start off a little clumsily. Thank you for the introduction. I don't want to repeat. I'm tempted to repeat the same thing, essentially the same speech I gave in Montreal, but for some reason I want to add to it as well. So Michelle said a lot of things, and Cynthia said a lot of things. I want to start off by saying that the war in Libya, in fact, all these wars. There are no just wars. That is the wrong way to look at these wars. There are no just wars, not at all. And the war in Libya is an example of injustice, not only against Libya, but against the entire continent of Africa. This was very clear. It was made very clear to me at the highest levels in Libya that the threats against the Libyans were not only threats against their country, but against the entire continent. That the United States, the European, and even countries we consider Libyan allies were upset at the fact that Libya was working for a Pan-African dream. This is very important to note. Because of the war in Libya, there's famine in other parts of Africa. Because of the war in Libya, important development projects in the rest of Africa have been halted overnight. Because of the war in Libya, that continent is being deliberately put in a place where it has to be independent, it has to be dependent on outside powers. They wanted to prevent that continent from being able to manufacture its own resources without sending them outside and buying them back. The European Union made this very clear to the Libyans, as did the United States. And as I said, even countries that are considered Libyan allies loosely were unhappy about this. This includes Russia, China, and Iran's not a Libyan ally, but this also includes them. And I have to be very frank about that from the get-go.
Thank you.
And I want to emphasize that I oppose this war, and I am not against agency within Africa or the Arab world for self-determination, but this goes against the very, very notion of self-determination. When you have outside forces acting in such a brutal fashion, where they bomb food storage facilities, preschools, places where children's vaccination records are kept, heritage sites, places for people with mobility problems, hospitals, clinics, places where oxygen is put in containers for the hospitals. The list goes on. Residential neighborhoods, farmers' homes. These places had nothing to do with any combat of any sort. And I believe that they're under the pretext of no-fly zones. What type of a no-fly zone is this when you are deliberately offensively attacking a city? That's Tripoli and the other major urban centers there were under a state of siege. And this siege included creating a currency shortage, creating a water shortage, an electricity shortage, and a fuel shortage, and a food shortage. And yes, NATO is in bed with the terrorists. NATO directs the terrorists, and NATO is a terrorist organization. There's a lot of heroes in Libya, but who are fighting for their homes. They're not heroes necessarily of choice. They're heroes because of fate, because they're defending their homes. And I'm going to jump in tangents here, but I was in the Rexus Al Nasser, which is its proper name now is the Swiss in Al Nasser, with a lot of internationals. And I want to get the record clear. It was the so-called Gaddafi loyalists who were defending us. They were defending us and they were heroes. And that is the honest truth. It was the so-called rebels that were shooting at us and trying to kill us, all of us, including the reporters who were saying that they're freedom fighters. We were all afraid of them. So when you have the other members of the international press there who are on the choir saying that the rebels are freedom fighters and revolutionaries, but they're afraid that they'll get killed by those people, what does that say about them? What does that say?
They're liars.
Hypocrisy.
Exactly. They're liars. And we were kept there, and I'll be honest, because there was the possibility that government officials might come into the hotel, and with internationals there, that there might be some safety for them. But I want to point out that NATO also wanted us to stay there as human bait, as bait. They believed that there was the possibility that members of the government or of Gaddafi's family might come to the hotel and try to use us as human shields.